Well, we're here at the Military Officers Organization, Western Reserve Chapter, at Prime 93 on Manchester Road, and it's our annual monthly meeting, and our distinguished guest here is this also distinguished guy, and I got to treat him nice because he's a colonel, retired colonel, right? And Colonel Shaker Fidel.
Thank you.
And this is, you know, one thing about doing these interviews, these are the closest I've ever stood to some of these high-ranking officers.
Listen to him. He's the guy who really deserves the credit. World War II, and any kind of guy who's been in combat, that's where my honor goes. I might be a member of VFW, but I was called up from the Ohio Air Guard in a fighter unit. I was an intelligence officer there with a fighter unit, and we got activated in one day. I was at Goodyear Tire one day, and the next day I was in the Air Force, and then 6 months later I ended up in Korea because the North Koreans had hijacked one of our Navy ships, the Pueblo. So that's how I ended up being a VFW qualified member. But these guys who actually went through combat, I have high respect for, and thank you very much for calling me a colonel, and high respect, because you're the guys that really need the respect.
Well, you know, I always had to look behind me to see who's holding a rifle to make sure I went forward.
Yeah, I had uncles and a lot of cousins who were in the Second War in both the European theater and in the Far East, and they told stories that, you know, would make you shiver. But and I always looked up to them, and I always wanted to be one of those warriors. And in fact, I followed my brother, who ended up being a bomber crew member with the Air Force. He had 20 years. And on a B-47, that's a three-man crew, 6-jet bomber, and most of his time was out of Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus.
Yeah, okay, now, how did you went to the University of Akron, right?
Yes, I was an ROTC cadet.
And you majored in?
Well, first I was in civil engineering for about 4 years, and then decided I thought maybe I'd like to do something different. Went into industrial management and ended up being BS in industrial engineering. So I have a multiple degree. Then I went on and got my master's.
See, Ray, no wonder they put this guy in intelligence, right? Now, Ray, our esteemed director, photographer, and chief guy that hollers at me, you know, when I'm not doing anything right on the show, but he was also intelligence. But, you know, I could never get him to open up. So when I sat next to you, you said you're in intelligence. That's what does a guy in intelligence do? Can you enlighten us here?
Sure, keeps his mouth shut.
That makes a great interview, you know.
Well, when I finished ROTC at Akron and graduated in '62, it's 1962, I went straight from college right to my assignment in England. Actually, you're supposed to go to a 10-month intelligence officer school, and I didn't get to go to that. So when I ended up at a fighter base, brown bars, second lieutenant, and no wings, I was really at a big disadvantage. So I had to learn the hard way. And I tell you, the guys who really helped me out were the guys who were academy graduates, U.S. Air Force Academy. And that led me into a career where still today I represent the academy in my zip code area in Akron.
Well, you do a lot of work for the academy, don't you?
Well, I'm an admissions officer, but I did quite a bit of work sometime back when I was still active reserve. I was in charge of all of Northeast Ohio in admissions work, and we had about 35, 40 people, soup to nuts as far as officers were concerned. And I had General Jenkins as one of my staff advisors. I had some psychologists who helped me out when we evaluated students. So we got 35 kids every year to go to the academy back in those days. Today it's quite different. I think they get quite less, but I work closely with the football coach over time, doing the athletic. I can't recruit, but what I do is let them know who looks good in the field, and I send them articles. And Fisher DeBerry and I had a good relationship over many years while he was at the academy. And I always remember the 3 years he played Notre Dame, the Air Force always won.
Well, good. Okay, now, exactly what did you do? I'm going to really pump you on this one. What did you do in a fighter base?
Well, you saw how I skirted all around that issue, right, Sarge?
Right. Well, I'm going to nail you down on it.
Well, when I first got there, I learned how to be an operational intelligence officer, which worked with the fighter pilots on their mission was heading east, which was back in the Cold War days. We had a nuclear mission, so we looked at where we were going in case a war broke out to deliver weapons, and we provided them with the routes and what they're going to be up against as far as the opposition was concerned, things like that.
Okay, now you were previously telling me at another dinner about when you went with these guys, and what country did you go to, and then for operational training, and you actually rode in the airplane? Tell us that story.
Oh, that's really something, because I always wanted to be a pilot. But I noticed that because I couldn't see, so I couldn't qualify medically. But our guys used to go to Libya twice a year because of the weather and do all their training, bombing, strafing, that sort of thing. In the fall of '64, I went down there to see and observe what they did, so my work with them would be a lot more valuable. And I got to go up, first of all, in the morning we went out to the range to see where all this happened, and then back to the base. In the afternoon, I got in the back seat of an F-100 Super Sabre jet. And I got thinking about it because I'm a little claustrophobic. And when I got thinking about, geez, I don't know if I want to do this, the canopy went down, it's locked in place, and I heard the rest of the guys talk about we're ready to go. And we had a formation takeoff. We went out over the desert, came in about 50 feet over the floor of the desert at 300 to 400 miles an hour and pulled straight up to practice what they call an Immelman turn, delivery rather. And then you go upside down and flip out going backwards, opposite direction where you came, so or the same direction from where you came. And I went through that a couple times, and I thought, boy, this is really tough. But yeah, I've got some good pictures of that whole thing. But I was there about 3 or 4 days, and beautiful Mediterranean Sea, but that's been some time ago.
Well, now, did you use dummy bomb? Did they release at the end of the Immelman?
Well, yes, they used
that?
practice bombs. They were they call them 25-pounders. And then they were scored on where those bombs landed in the big circles on the desert floor.
Now, explain why they use that procedure.
Well, that, in a way, when you release a nuclear weapon and the weapon goes off, if you're in that same area going the same direction, you're going to get killed. You're going to get probably, with that kind of heat, the whole plane and you are gone. So going backwards away from that is what those guys did to stay out of the way of the nuclear weapon flash and the weapon itself.
Was that called bomb tossing?
You know, to tell you the truth, I don't remember what they call it, but that was delivery, when you deliver the bomb to a target.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you get along with the Libyans? Because later on, what happens?
Well,
with Gaddafi.
We went into town one time, and I noticed that even though I was Lebanese descent, speak Arabic, I spoke a lot better then. When we went into the shops, I noticed that they weren't very keen on the Yanks, so I could see that somewhere in the future we were going to have a problem, and that's actually what ended up happening.
Now, when did you get promoted to lieutenant colonel?
Well, golly, I can't remember the year because I retired in 1990 with about 26 years service. So I can't remember the year, to tell you the truth. I was a kid. Hate to tell you my age.
Okay, an intelligence guy can't remember though.
Well,
okay, we'll let you go on that one.
That's the best way, because then you don't have to say much, because then you become like a politician where you talk a lot and don't say anything. So in our field, we just don't want to say much, you know.
When you finished in Libya, now where did you go from then, or from working with the fighter pilots in Europe?
Well, I ended up, after that was about 4 or 5 months, my 3 years was up at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I came back home, ended up with a Michigan Air Guard when I worked for 3M in Detroit. And didn't really like what I was doing, so I came back to Akron, eventually got into the Ohio Air National Guard, and ended up with the same kind of fighter unit in Columbus, and then became one of their intelligence officers. And not too long after that, about 2 years, I was at Goodyear Tire one day at work. Phone rang. Next day I was in the Air Force. We got activated because of the Pueblo hijacking. I ended up going to Korea, helping the South Koreans learn how to do targeting and intelligence work.
That sounds like an interesting career.
Actually, I wouldn't trade it for a dime, even though it disrupted my whole career. but Goodyear was good enough. In those days, there wasn't the kind of thing that I do today with the employer support of the Guard and Reserve. They took care of me as if there was one. And when I got back 18 months later, I ended up almost the same desk and resumed the kind of work I was doing before I left.
You gave them a banner or a recognition thing too, like you gave me?
Right. Goodyear recently, and in fact, one of their vice presidents is on my team for employer support. And he and their company, because of the kind of things they're doing, promising to hire 1,000 veterans. That was a few years ago, and then they re-promised that this past summer. Those kind of things, we gave them an above and beyond award for a lot of the work that they were doing, and someday they hope to get a Freedom Award.
And how did you end your career? Still in the work you were doing before?
Well, I ended up primarily working for the Academy as in the Air Force Reserve itself, because I'd been through the active duty twice, and then the Air Guard twice, and then the Air Force Reserve. So all my years were cumulative of 26 years as a dual career. And I'm still working for the Academy as a volunteer.
What do you do? Go around to the high schools, or they recommend kids to you?
Well, our whole idea is try to find talent for the Academy. Of course, it's pretty strict, the requirements to get there. So we go to schools where they have career days, that sort of thing, and looking for talent. And the counselors, I stay in touch with counselors. I only have a couple zip codes because I'm getting past that age, that. But we have a good bunch of people who are working for the Academy to seek out the students.
Would you want to make a commercial right now about? But you don't need that, do you? You don't need to get a mass of people into.
Well, we're always looking for the right people, though. It's tough to find the kind of candidates that you really need for the academies, whether it's Air Force, Navy, Army, Coast Guard.
What are the requirements?
Well, it's pretty tough when you look at physically, it's really, you got to be a perfect specimen. And if you want to fly, you got to be beyond the 20/20 vision. There's more to it than that. And then, of course, the ACT and SAT tests, those are quite high as far as requirements are concerned. Leadership is a big thing. Not only do you be an excellent student, and maybe you've been an athlete, but it's the leadership that you've shown in your jobs you may have had at school or outside of school, volunteerism. It's all around full person that we look for.
Well, that's great. Our leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you.
And okay, you're doing a great job. Keep it up now, okay?
Thank you.
Pick out the good ones.
Here's one right here.
Oh my goodness.
And the guy behind the camera. Thank you guys for your service.
You'll have to say that because I'm pick up my own check,
Thanks, guys.
Okay, our guest right now is Lieutenant Colonel Joseph O'Brien, and I'm sure you celebrate the Irish Day, don't you?
I go on St. Patrick's Day. I sure do.
Is everything green there? Green eggs, green grits, the whole shot?
Green eggs and green beer.
Oh, green beer. Okay, you brought up the best part of it.
Yes, it is.
We got a lot of rank coming. This is a second colonel. And when I looked at the roster, we got of all the colonels, a couple generals, lieutenant colonels, and I was a first lieutenant in the Air Force and Air Corps.
Congratulations.
World War II. And when I first came in here and Dan wanted me to join, I looked, he sent me a roster. Dan, these guys with all that rank, they're going to make me do the dishes tonight.
I love it.
Okay, let's hear about your career in the military.
Okay, I joined the Army and in a reserve unit for 4.5 years. It was the 255th Light Truck Company in Akron. I was a truck driver. And during that time, I was finishing my high school and going to college. And I graduated from Kent State in 1961, and I received a commission as a second lieutenant in the Medical Service Corps. That's in hospital work. And I went to the basic course at Fort Sam Houston, Texas in 1962 with my wife, Linda. And we then were assigned to Fort Hood, Texas, and I was at an 85th Evacuation Hospital. It was a field unit. And from there, the unit was moved to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And from there, we were reassigned to Heidelberg, Germany. I was at the 130th Station Hospital. I was the Assistant Chief of Personnel. Then I went to Vietnam for my first tour. I was the commander of the 561st Ambulance Company in Vietnam, and then I had that job for a short time, and I was brought to the 44th Medical Brigade, and I was the Assistant S1. And following that assignment, I was sent back to the advanced course at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And then after that, I was assigned to Washington, D.C., to the Surgeon General's office. And then back to Vietnam again, my second tour.
Did you like it there? You went back again?
Well,
another vacation, huh?
Yeah, yes. Most everybody had 2 or more tours in Vietnam at that time. And then I was reassigned from there in 1972. I went to Letterman Army Medical Center. That was located in Presidio, San Francisco. And I was the adjutant, and eventually I became the Chief of Personnel there. And then from there I went to, after about 5 years there, I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I went to the hospital. I was the Chief of Personnel and Troop Commander. And then I went from there to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And after my tour there, I was the Chief of Personnel and Troop Commander again. And then I retired from there. And I retired on a Friday, and then on Monday morning, I became a member of the St. Thomas Medical Center at Akron, Ohio.
That's where you are now?
No, I was a vice president there for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after 10 years, I went to the Apple Creek Developmental Center, facility for the mental retarded. And I spent 10 years there. And then I retired, and I've been retired for the past 15 years.
You had quite a career. You mentioned your wife went with you. Did she was commissioned?
No, my wife was a loving spouse. She was very active with the military, helping us, and she was raised the children. I have a son. I have an older daughter, and then I have a middle daughter, and then my son, Kevin. And he's now in the Navy and down in.
How did that happen? Navy.
Oh yeah, he loves it. He's down in I can't remember the name of it. Norfolk, Virginia. Thank you very much. He's in Norfolk, and so we've all been proud of the military. I have an older brother who's retired in the Air Force. And then I came along with retired from the Army, and then my next brother, he retired from the United States Army. And that was my wonderful career. We enjoyed it very much.
Well, I guess they set up a recruiting office right across the street from your house.
I think they had it at the house.
At the house, it looks like, yeah. Yes. Now, in your Vietnam tour, you were with ambulance companies, right?
Well, the first time I went, I was commanded an ambulance company.
What rank were you then?
I was a captain, and then I went to the medical brigade, and I was the assistant S1.
Okay, what is an S1 for the public?
S1 is personnel. We ran redistributed resources, human resources throughout the medical brigade. They had 3 medical groups, and that's what I did.
Well, in your ambulance group, that was pretty risky work, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't where I was. No, the most of the ambulance, the risky business was those that flew the helicopters, the medical evacuation hospital staff. They did the hard work and the dangerous work.
Where did you guys take them then?
Well, we went in very short range driving. We were fairly well protected.
Well, great. That's good news.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. That's an interesting career you had.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to serve, and I'm proud of the United States of America, and I love it.
That's a real endorsement.
Thank you. Boys.
Well, our guest now, and I used to say victim, but let's say make it guest, okay, is Colonel Frank Steele.
That's correct.
And Frank, tell us about your career in the military.
Well, I was commissioned a second lieutenant out of college in the artillery. I got a deferment, went to law school at Ohio State, got out, I applied to be a JAG officer. And I was admitted, and we went down, and back then we had to go through the whole basic, so I went through armor basic, so I had gone through artillery basic and armor basic, and then I went to Judge Advocate basic, which is at the University of Virginia, wonderful place. And I served 3 years in active duty.
Where were you in active duty?
I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, was assistant judge advocate, and did mostly court martials and such. That was a relatively small base, and a lot of the smaller bases, Edgewood Arsenal, which is now part of Aberdeen, was a separate base. We had a Navy base up in that area, and they would send us out to these other outlying posts that didn't have judge advocates, but only had one.
What rank were you then?
Well, I started out as a captain.
They got you in as a captain?
Yes,
Boy,
they got us in
They
as a
wanted
captain.
you badly then, huh?
And the good part was when you get a deferment, we started out as captains over 4 years. If you remember, the pay usually started after 4 years. You know, they kept it down to convince you to stay in. Then I had a lot of good experiences. They used to, rather than a big law firm, you start out, you kind of get thrown into baptism of fire, so we would just go in and try cases. I tried homicide cases as a young lawyer in the military. And I got out in 1967, came back to Akron, where my dad was a lawyer, and I started up with the JAG units in Cleveland. They had 3 JAG units. We had our headquarters up there, the 9th JAG. And I was with them from 1967 until about 83 or 84.
Did you go on active duty again?
No, I never went back on active duty.
And where did you get to be a colonel then?
Well, I guess I was lucky. I never held a 06 slot, but just right at the end of my career, I guess I had impressed somebody enough that I got promoted just as I was ready to retire.
And you're still practicing law?
Yes,
and
yes. So I came back to Akron in '67, and I started practicing with my dad's firm, which was Hershey and Brown. It was about 14 lawyers. He passed away. I was there about 30 years. My brother Terry was with that firm, and then we all kind of retired, and I went with another firm for about 12, 14 years.
Can I ask you, what was your most interesting court-martial case?
Well, one time I got to sit in when I was in reserves in one of the My Lai trials down at Fort Meade.
Oh, boy.
A fellow named Lieutenant Colonel Donaldson. He was the battalion commander, and he was charged with the cover-up. And they had us helping the prosecution for a while, and he had some big-time civilian lawyers, and it was kind of fun to watch, be in there, and then the JAG officers were prosecuting. They'd go out the back door, and the big-time defense lawyers with the media and the long hair, they'd go out the front door to the reporters and tell them what
Always,
job they had done.
Well, how did it come out? What happened to the when they accused the cover-up?
You know, I was trying to remember back. I think they convicted him of something. It was kind of thin. I mean, you know, that he actually knew what was going on. So I think he got some much lesser offense.
I remember Medina, who was the company commander.
Yeah, you got a good memory.
Yeah, when he left the military, he joined Enstrom Helicopter, and he was president or chairman of the board of Enstrom and Helicopter.
Yeah, and I don't remember. Lieutenant Calley's the one that got.
Yeah, he went to
and,
prison. Yeah, he's out now, and
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything that he's passed away or.
It was quite interesting. It was a good way to start a career as a lawyer. I
Oh,
think.
uh-huh.
That we got a lot of good experience. And it was, I was single most of the time, so I could, when they asked them, they need an attorney somewhere out at some other base, I would go and met a lot of people, and it was a very good experience. Aberdeen was a very nice place to be. They had a lot of technical people up there, inventors, and so they needed a patent officer. I was never a technical person. I was the patent officer, so I got to hang around with these PhD physicists and talk about their inventions and go out to the range and watch them shoot off everything in the world. It was very interesting. It's been a very good career. I did about 4 years as a West Point liaison officer, which, we sort of recruit or go around.
Shaker and Fidel.
Shaker does the Air Force Academy.
He's still active in that,
Still.
isn't he? Yeah.
Shaker is a classmate of mine in high school.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Frank,
Okay.
for a colonel. Boy, I better
good.
use the rank here.
Oh,
I'm in
okay.
trouble. Okay. Thank you for
well, thank
being
you.
with
Good
us,
job,
and
Ernie.
sure enough, and we'll be
I
seeing
was
you
so
again.
glad to meet you the other night.
Well, it's my pleasure.